Hello, welcome to Chapter 6, Section 4, Solving Radical Equations. So in order to solve a radical equation, that just means solving a square root equation, you first have to follow the steps underneath what says solving radical equations. So first, we isolate the radical on one side of the equation if necessary. What does that mean? That means, like in example 1, where we have 2 in front of the square root, we need to get rid of it. So the square root needs to be by itself on one side. So before we can do anything, we need to divide both sides by 2. Which means that our real equation is the square root of x plus 2 equals 4. Because we did it to both sides, so 8 divided by 2 is 4. Now, it says, in step 2, raise each side of the equation to the same exponent to eliminate the radical symbol. All that means is, how do you undo a square root? You square both sides. So we are going to square both sides. Once we've squared both sides, the square and the square root cancel. So we get that x plus 2 equals 4 squared, which is 16. Now we just solve for x. So we subtract 2 from both sides. So x should equal 14. Now we have no idea whether or not that's actually going to work until we check, which is step 4. We have to check. We have to plug it back in and check and make sure that the left side equals the right. So we're saying that the square root of, 2 times the square root of 14 plus 2 should equal 8. Well, 14 plus 2 is the square root of 16. Should equal 8. Well, the square root of 16 is 4. So 2 times 4 equals 8. Yes, it does. So we can go back over here and circle our answer. Now in example 2, we have to do the same thing. First, we have to isolate the radical on one side of the equation if necessary. Well, on the left side of the equation, where there is a square root, there's nothing else. There's nothing in front of it or behind on that side. So we can go ahead and do step 2, which is to square both sides. Now you have to be very careful, because even though the 2 and the square root go away, to get 2x plus 7, the right side is x minus 4 squared, which is x minus 4 times x minus 4. So we've got to distribute. X times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. Negative 4x is negative 4x. And negative 4 and negative 4 makes positive 16. Well, at this point, we have a square root function. So just like when we were solving stuff before, we need to make one side equal 0 and then use the quadratic formula. You can also factor. I'm going to use the quadratic formula because that's what my classes seem to like. So we have to move the 2x over by subtracting and move the 7 over by subtracting. We get the negative 2x here and the negative 7 there. And now we're going to combine like terms. 0 equals x squared, negative 4, negative 2 all make negative 10 x. And 16 minus 7 is 9. So now we go over and work the quadratic formula out, where a is 1, b is negative 10, and c is 9. Now I've used the quadratic formula in these videos before, so I'm not going to go into super detail about how I used it, but you can watch while I do it. I'm filling the numbers into the quadratic formula. It's all over. 2 times 1. We simplify so that x is 10 plus or minus the square root of 64 over 2, and the square root of 64, nice for us, is 8. Well, remember we have to split this up into our positive and our negative version. So we get 10 plus 8 over 2, which is 9, and we get 10 minus 8 over 2, which is 1. But in order for us to know that these numbers are actually our answers, the 9 and the 1, we have to take the 9 and the 1 and plug it back into the original function, the one that was not tampered with. So we have to plug it in, as we check, to the square root of 2 times our x plus 7 equal to our x plus 4. minus 4. Oops. So now I replace the blank with the number. Let's try 9 first. Well, 2 times 9 plus 7 is 25. So we're asking, does the square root of 25 equal 5? Yes, it does. 9 is an answer. We also plug in the 1. We have 2 times 1 plus 7. Does that equal 1 minus 4? Well, 1 minus 4 is negative 3. Guess what? You can't take the square root and make it equal a negative number, so this is wrong, which means that this is wrong. That is called an extraneous solution. That's what's in the next blank. When we checked the previous example, one of the solutions didn't work. This is called an extraneous solution. You must always check for these. So because one didn't work, if I wrote 9 and 1 as my answers, I would be completely wrong. You'd get the whole thing wrong because you're showing me that you didn't actually check your answers. So let's go on and fill in that word. Extraneous is E-X-T-R-A-N-E-O-U-S. Oops. That's a U. Solution. Now when we talked about doing modeling, we also talked about how in the radical sign, the index is the number in the radical. This value is the same as the denominator in the fractional exponents. So this is denominator. Therefore, square root is the same as saying the half power. Which means that instead of writing what's on the screen, I could go ahead and change this to the square root of x plus 30 equal to x, and then just follow my steps the way that they were on the first page. So it says to isolate the radical on one side of the equation if necessary. My square root is completely by itself on the left side. Then, raise each side of the equation to the same exponent to eliminate the radical symbol. How do you get rid of a square root? You square it. What you do one side, you do to the other. So our equation is really x plus 30 is equal to x squared. X squared causes this to be a quadratic function, which means we need one side to equal 0, so we subtract x and we subtract 30. We subtract x and we subtract 30. So that 0 equals x squared minus x minus 30. Well, now we get to do what we did on the last problem, which is the quadratic formula. A equals 1, b equals negative 1, c equals negative 30. We plug it in. X equals negative 1 plus or minus square root negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 30 all over 2 times 1, which means that x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of some number over 2. Well, that number is 121. Good. 121 is a perfect square. So x is just 1 plus or minus 11 over 2, which means that we get 1 plus 11 over 2 and 1 minus 11 over 2. Well, that math is pretty simple. We get 6 and we get negative 5. But we're not done, because on every single problem that you do, you must check our work. Okay, because there is a very, very, very large chance that when we plug it in, one of them or both of them might not work. So we have 6 plus 30. Does that equal 6? Well, that's the square root of 36, which is 6, which means that the 6th answer is correct. Let's try that with the other one. Negative 5 plus 30 under the radical. Does that equal negative 5? Well, no, it doesn't. It can't, because the square root of negative 5 is positive 5. So this is entirely wrong, which means that negative 5 is not an answer. It is another extraneous solution. Now, if for some reason you end up with both of them not equal to the other side, you would simply have no solution. Can you get both to be right? Absolutely. But you have to check first. Have a great day.